Hi everyone, we are good too. We're going to present on human rights in Malaysia. Before going to this topic, we need to know what human rights are. Human rights are rights inherent to all human beings, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status. Human rights include the right to life and liberty, freedom from slavery and torture, freedom of opinion and expression, the right to work and education, and many more. The idea of human rights spread quickly to India, Greece, and eventually Rome. Now, we will talk about the history of human rights in Malaysia.
The history of human rights in Malaysia dates back to the 1940s, when the British colonized Malaysia. During this period, the British imposed a system of indirect rule, whereby the local rulers retained their authority but were subject to the British government's control. This system resulted in a lack of legal protection for the rights of the local people, and the British authorities only responded to human rights abuses after they had been reported by the local people. In the 1960s, Malaysia gained its independence from the British and the country began to develop its own system of human rights protection. In 1971, the Malaysian government passed the Constitution of Malaysia, which incorporated a number of human rights provisions. These provisions included the right to life, liberty, and security of person, the right to freedom of speech and expression, and the right to a fair trial. The Constitution also enshrined the right to freedom of religion and the right to an education. In the 1980s, the Malaysian government began to focus on the development of policies and legislation to further protect human rights. In 1988, it passed the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia Act, which established the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, SHKAM. SHKAM is tasked with promoting and protecting human rights in Malaysia, and it has the power to investigate and recommend the prosecution of human rights abuses. In the 1990s, Malaysia began to ratify a number of international human rights treaties, such as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the Convention Against Torture. This signaled a commitment to upholding international human rights standards. That's the ups and downs history of human rights in Malaysia.
Now, let's talk about the current situation of human rights in Malaysia. Malaysia is a country that has seen a great deal of progress in terms of human rights over the past few decades. The country is now a signatory to a number of international human rights conventions, and has made some headway in terms of providing basic rights to its citizens. Malaysia has a high level of civil and political rights as enshrined in its federal constitution. These include freedom of speech, assembly, and association, as well as the right to a fair trial and freedom from torture. Malaysia has made progress in expanding access to education, healthcare, and social protection for vulnerable groups, such as women and ethnic minorities. In terms of freedom of the press, Malaysia has made some progress in the last few decades. There is now more space for independent media outlets to report on issues. Besides, in terms of freedom of religion, Malaysia has also seen some progress in recent years. The government has taken steps to ensure that religious minorities are protected and that freedom of religion is respected. However, consider Malaysia human rights. Both law and establishment are still lack. This include a restriction on free expression, the use of detention without trial on a regular basis, and the criminalization of peaceful assembling and association. Discrimination against certain ethnic and religious minorities, as well as the marginalization of indigenous people, remain issues. There are also laws in some states that discriminate against women and LGBTQ people. Now, let's talk about the human rights issues in Malaysia.
Cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment. At least 19 people died in police custody or shortly after release during the year A 40-year-old man died in April after being hospitalized on release from police detention the previous month. According to media reports, the autopsy found that Haganapathy's death was due to injuries sustained while in police detention. The government claimed that investigations were ongoing, but no one was charged. According to government figures, 105 people died in police custody, prisons and immigration detention centers between January 2020 and September 2021. Refugees, asylum seekers, and trafficking victims. Malaysia has not ratified the 1951 Refugee Convention. Over 175,000 refugees and asylum seekers, most of whom come from Myanmar, are registered with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, UNHCR, office but have no legal status and remain unable to work or enroll in government schools. The new government has taken a hard line on refugees, with the Home Minister stating that they have no status, rights, or basis to present any demands to the government. The authorities pushed boatloads of desperate Rohingya refugees who were trying to reach Malaysia's shores back out to sea, claiming that they were doing so to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Those that have been permitted to land have been detained as illegal migrants, with some being prosecuted for immigration violations. Even children have been detained in shelters and threatened with prosecution. Malaysia did little to stop a vicious online hate speech campaign against Rohingya refugees in the country in April. Sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination against lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, LGBT, people remains pervasive in Malaysia. Federal law punishes carnal knowledge against the order of nature with up to 20 years in prison and mandatory whipping. Numerous state Sharia laws prohibit both same-sex relations and non-normative gender expression, resulting in frequent arrests of transgender people. Activists have filed 2 court cases, in the High Court and the Federal Court, challenging the existence and use of these laws in Selangor. In July, the minister in charge of religious affairs gave full license to the religious authorities to take action against transgender people, both through arrests and religious education to return them to the right path. In August, after activist Nicole Fong responded to his statement by posting a series of infographics online critical of the official Mukim program, which aims in part to influence LGBT people to renounce their non-normative gender identity or sexual orientation, religious authorities lodged a police report against her.
Child marriage. Malaysia continued to permit child marriage under both civil and Islamic law, in violation of its obligation under international law. Girls aged 16 and older can marry with the permission of their state's chief minister. For Muslims, most state Islamic law set a minimum age of 16 for girls and 18 for boys, but permit marriage below those ages, with no apparent minimum with the permission of a Sharia code. Widespread school closure due to COVID-19 may also increase the risk of child marriage, as research shows that leaving education is highly correlated with girls being married off. Overall, Malaysia has made some progress in protecting human rights, but there is still much work to be done. Despite the government's effort to address some of the country's human rights issues, violations continue to occur, ranging from discrimination against the ethnic minority and religion groups, to the use of the death penalty, to restriction on freedom of expression and association. In addition, serious concerns remain over the independence of the judiciary and the lack of an effective system of checks and balance. While the government has taken steps to address this issue, it is clear that much more needs to be done to ensure that all Malaysians enjoy the full range of basic human rights.